What would you do if the people who were supposed to love you the most watched your whole life burn down and told you it wasn't their problem? Before I answer that, hit that like button right now, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe so you never miss what happens next. My name is Maya Bennett. I'm 35 years old and I work as a paramedic. I've spent more than a decade rushing into other people's worst moments, staying calm when everything around me is falling apart. That training saved me the night my own life fell apart, because at 2 a.m, I stood on the sidewalk outside my apartment building and watched flames eat through the roof of the only home I had. The neighbors were outside in their pajamas. Someone had a blanket around my shoulders. I don't even remember who. My hands weren't shaking, but my mind was running through everything I owned, my furniture, my clothes, my late grandmother's old jewelry box, all of it turning to ash in front of me. And the first thing I did, the very first thing, was call my mother. She picked up on the fourth ring, her voice thick with sleep. I told her my apartment was on fire. There was a long pause, and then she said the words I will never forget as long as I live. She said, "Well, that's unfortunate, but you really should have been more careful with your things, Maya. This isn't something we can help with right now. Not are you okay? Not do you need a place to stay? Just a lecture about carefulness, like I had done something wrong by having my home burn down around me." I stood there with smoke still in my hair and let those words sink in like a stone dropping into water. A firefighter walked up to me a few minutes later. He introduced himself as Investigator Sam Cole from the county fire department. He wasn't in a rush, and he wasn't soft about it either. He asked me simple questions: how long I had lived there, whether I had been home, if I kept anything unusual near my belongings. Then he asked something that stuck with me. He asked who had access to my apartment recently, because they had found something at the scene that didn't sit right with him. I didn't think much of it that night. I was too tired, too numb, too focused on finding somewhere to sleep. I ended up at a cheap motel off the highway, filling out insurance paperwork on a lumpy bed, wondering how my own family could turn their backs on me in the worst moment of my life. The next morning, my brother Ethan called. He didn't ask if I was safe either. Instead, he asked if I had kept any of our late grandmother's important papers in my apartment. I found that strange, but I brushed it off, thinking maybe he was worried about sentimental items. It wasn't until my sister called an hour later, asking almost the exact same question, that something in my gut told me this wasn't a coincidence. See, 3 months earlier, our grandmother, Alina, had passed away. I was the one who had taken care of her during her final year, moving in with her, managing her medications, sitting with her through sleepless nights while my siblings visited maybe twice a month if I was lucky. Before she passed, she asked me to take her to see a lawyer. She didn't explain why. She just held my hand and said, "I know who really shows up." A few weeks after the funeral, the lawyer called a family meeting and read us the updated will. Grandma had left her house, a beautiful old property worth close to $280,000, entirely to me. Not split between the three of us like the old will said, just to me. My brother stormed out. My sister accused me of manipulating a dying old woman. My mother said we would discuss it privately, which in my family has always meant pressuring me until I gave in and gave something up. What none of them knew was that I had already been careful. I had the will notarized, made certified copies, and stored the original somewhere safe, far away from my apartment. I document everything. It's a habit from my job. In emergency medicine, if you don't write it down, it didn't happen. That habit was about to save everything. My apartment, the place my family assumed the only copy of that will was sitting, caught fire 6 weeks later. That afternoon, desperate and exhausted, I drove to my parents' house, hoping for a spare room, even just for a few nights. My mother opened the door only halfway. She told me they didn't have the space. My old bedroom was being used for storage now. My father appeared behind her, hands in his pockets, and said, "You've always been able to handle things on your own, kiddo." Then my mother added, almost gently, like it was supposed to be comforting, "This really isn't something we need to get involved in, honey. You'll figure it out. You always do." I stood on the porch of the house I grew up in and finally understood something clearly for the first time. They weren't being cruel because they hated me. They were being cold because being cold to me had all. eyes been free, I never made them pay a price for it. I always figured things out myself. I always landed on my feet. So I drove back to that motel, sat on the ugly bedspread, and opened a blank document on my phone. At the top, I typed one word: timeline. If my own family wanted to treat my disaster as something that had nothing to do with them, then I was going to handle it the way I handle every emergency, completely and by myself. But this time, I was writing everything down. 2 days later, the insurance adjuster came to see me. She was a tired-looking woman named Carol with a clipboard and low expectations, because most fire victims have nothing to show her. No inventory, no photos, no proof of what they owned. I opened my laptop, the one thing I had grabbed on my way out that night out of habit, and showed her a folder. Photos of every room, receipts, serial numbers, a full inventory I had built years earlier and kept updated. Carol looked at the screen, then looked at me, and said she had never in 15 years seen a claim this organized. She flagged it to move quickly. Then, almost as an afterthought, she frowned at her paperwork and told me the fire marshal's report listed the cause as undetermined, pending investigation. Not accidental. I asked her what that meant, and she explained carefully that accidental fires usually get closed fast. When something stays open like this, it usually means someone isn't convinced it was an accident. I thought about Investigator Cole crouched by that scorched corner of my apartment, photographing it from every angle. I thought about my brother and sister both asking about Grandma's papers within hours of the fire. And I opened my timeline document and wrote a new line, plain and simple, the same way I chart a patient's condition. Cause of fire, possibly not an accident. If you've ever had a family member act suspicious right after your worst moment, comment the word "documented" below, because you're about to see exactly why writing things down matters. Investigator Cole called me back to the county office 3 days later. He had a diagram spread across a table, my apartment's floor plan marked with red and black lines showing burn patterns. He explained that accidental fires usually have a clear source and spread outward in a predictable pattern. Mine didn't follow that pattern at all. It had a single point of origin, low in the corner near where I kept a small filing cabinet with my important documents, far from any outlet or appliance. The burn there was deep and localized, the kind investigators see when a liquid accelerant has been poured rather than an electrical spark catching naturally. He told me the lab results were still pending, but he already had a strong suspicion. Then he asked the question that would split my family wide open. He asked who had a key to my apartment in the past 2 weeks. I answered honestly, the way I answer every question in an emergency, calm and factual, even though my stomach was turning to ice. My building manager had a master key. I had my own, and then there was the spare. A week before the fire, my sister had called asking to borrow my spare key to water a plant while I worked a stretch of night shifts. I don't even own many plants. It struck me as strange at the time, but I let it go because I was exhausted. I also told him something I had almost forgotten. 2 days before the fire, a feeling I couldn't explain had pushed me to call a locksmith and schedule a full rekey of my apartment, just to get that spare key out of circulation. The locksmith's earliest appointment was 3 days out. The fire happened the night before he was scheduled to arrive. Investigator Cole didn't write anything for a moment. He just looked at me and said, "You sensed something was wrong and you tried to protect yourself. You just ran out of time." That was exactly it. That night I couldn't sleep. Around 2 in the morning, something surfaced in my mind, the hallway camera. My building had one security camera mounted above the fire exit, angled toward the row of apartment doors that included mine. If my sister had used that key, the camera would have caught her. I called the building manager the moment his office opened. The footage, he told me, only stayed on the server for 2 weeks before it recorded over itself. The fire had happened 5 days earlier, which meant we were in a race against the clock. He hesitated about pulling it without police involvement, worried about liability. I told him plainly that a criminal investigation was already open, that Investigator Cole's name was on the file, and that losing crucial footage because we waited too long was not something either of us wanted to explain to a judge later. He agreed to meet me right away. We preserved that footage that same morning and handed the original file over to Cole untouched. That afternoon, my sister sent me a text, playing the concerned sibling. She wrote that the fire had started near my filing cabinet in the corner, and wasn't that strange? She also asked if I had lost Grandma's documents. I read that message 3 times. I had never told anyone where the fire started. Investigator Cole had specifically kept that detail out of any conversation with my family, so no outside guesses could contaminate the case. There was no innocent way for my sister to know exactly which corner of my apartment had burned first, unless she had been there. I didn't confront her. I didn't say a single word that would tip her off. I replied with something soft and vague, thanked her for checking in, and said the investigation was ongoing. Then I screenshotted her message, logged the date and time, and sent it straight to Investigator Cole with one line. She knows where it started. He replied within the hour. Interesting, keep everything. Don't engage. A few days later, at a family gathering for a distant relative's memorial, my sister's neighbor, a friendly older man who fixes small engines, mentioned casually that my brother-in-law had borrowed his gas can a couple weeks earlier and returned it completely empty. He laughed about it, said their lawn wasn't even big enough to need that much gas. I asked when exactly that was, and it lined up perfectly with the week of the fire. I called Investigator Cole from the parking lot. He told me the lab results had just come back that morning. The samples taken from my filing cabinet corner tested positive for a gasoline-based accelerant. Everything was pointing in one direction now, and it had my sister's name written all over it. If you're starting to feel your blood boil right now the way mine did, take a second, hit that thumbs up, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, and subscribe, because the next part is where everything comes to light. The following morning, I drove to the bank and opened a safe deposit box I had rented months earlier, right after my grandmother first told me she was changing her will. Inside was the original document, notarized, sealed, untouched by any fire because it had never been in my apartment to begin with. My family had burned my home believing that will was inside it. It wasn't. It never had been. Underneath the will was something I hadn't expected, a sealed envelope with my name written in my grandmother's shaky handwriting. Inside, she had written that she knew what would happen after she was gone. She wrote that she had watched her own daughter, my mother, spend years keeping the peace by favoring my siblings and overlooking me, and that she regretted not stepping in sooner. Her final line stayed with me. She wrote, "If they ever come for what's yours, don't shrink. You were the one who stayed." I sat in that quiet little room for a long time holding that letter. Then I made my decision. I called Investigator Cole and told him I was fully in. Whatever the case needed from me, I would give it. A week later, he called with an update that turned every scattered piece into one clear picture. The hallway footage showed a figure entering my apartment the night before the fire, matching my sister's height, build, and the long coat she wears in every season. Phone records placed my brother-in-law's cell near my building that same night, somewhere he had no reason to be. The gas can was documented. The lab results were positive. And there was one more piece of evidence that made my stomach drop when Investigator Cole showed me the sealed evidence bag. Inside was a small keychain, warped and blackened by heat, but the shape was still unmistakable. A tiny silver bird on a ring. I had bought 2 of these years ago on a trip we took together as kids, one for me and one for my sister, the last good memory we shared before everything in our family turned into competition. I had given her that keychain for her birthday. She had put her spare keys on it, and it had melted into the exact corner of my apartment where the fire started. Investigator Cole asked if I recognized it, and I told him everything: when I bought it, when I gave it to her, and why. My voice didn't shake, though everything underneath it did. Charges were prepared. Arson, and eventually insurance fraud, because it came out that my sister had also quietly filed her own separate claim, hoping to profit from the very fire she had started. My brother-in-law's alibi fell apart under questioning, and he told investigators everything: the borrowed gas can, the spare key, the plan to destroy the will so the house would be split evenly and help cover their mounting debts. The probate hearing happened a week later, and my whole extended family showed up, most of them believing my sister's version of events. that I had manipulated a dying old woman and probably burned my own apartment down chasing an insurance check. My sister sat there with a small, confident smile, certain that without the will, the estate would be split evenly under the old T. RMS. Her lawyer stood up first and told the judge the most recent will could not be produced because the only known copy had tragically been lost in a fire. My mother's shoulders relaxed. My sister let out a breath of relief. And then my grandmother's lawyer stood beside me and said the words that changed the temperature of the entire room. "Your Honor, the original will is available. We have it right here." I placed it on the table, the seal catching the light from the windows. The room went completely silent except for the clock on the wall. The judge examined it page by page, along with the independent copy from the law office and the signed capacity evaluation proving my grandmother had been of sound mind. My sister's face went from confidence to confusion to horror in the span of a few seconds. Investigator Coles stood and gave the court a brief outline of the ongoing criminal case, careful to note it would be tried separately, but the shape of it was enough. A single point of origin, a confirmed accelerant, hallway footage placing someone at the scene, and a personal item recovered from the exact spot where the fire began, later identified as belonging to my sister. That's when she broke completely. She jumped up so fast her chair crashed to the floor, and she screamed across the courtroom that I always had to be the perfect one, that she was losing her house, that none of this was supposed to touch me, only the house was supposed to burn, not me. Her lawyer tried desperately to quiet her down, but it was too late. Every relative sitting in those benches, the ones who had come expecting to watch me get exposed as the greedy one, now understood exactly what had really happened and why. I didn't raise my voice once through any of it. I simply turned to my mother, who sat frozen beside my sister, and said quietly enough that the whole room had to go silent to hear me, "You told me it wasn't your problem. Turns out it was your daughter's crime, and somewhere deep down you knew." The judge approved the will exactly as my grandmother had written it. The house became mine. My sister was formally arrested through the criminal process on charges of arson and insurance fraud. My brother-in-law faced charges as an accessory. My mother was never charged, though she spent a very long afternoon answering hard questions about how much she actually knew before that fire ever started. There was no celebration for me afterward. I sat alone in my car in that courthouse parking lot and felt only a heavy, aching quiet, the same feeling I get at the end of a long shift when a patient finally rests. My family had tried to burn me down to keep themselves comfortable, and I hadn't lit a single match. I had simply stopped handing them the water to put themselves out at my expense. I moved into my grandmother's house a few months later, and I did something I think she would have wanted all along. I turned part of it into a small home care space where I could help people through their hardest days, the same way I had helped her. I hung her photo in the front hallway so she could watch over every person I care for there. My parents came by once during the holidays and asked if we could put everything behind us and just be a family again. I didn't slam the door, but I didn't open it wide either. I told them trust isn't something owed by blood. It's something rebuilt slowly, piece by piece, and that I was done paying the price for everyone else's piece. Fire destroys paper. It destroys walls and furniture and photographs. But it can never destroy the truth you were careful enough to write down and brave enough to say out loud in a room full of people who bet everything on your silence. If this story hit home for you, if you've ever been told your pain wasn't anyone else's problem, I want you to do 3 things right now. Hit that like button so this reaches someone else who needs it. Share it with a friend who needs to hear that staying quiet isn't the only option. And subscribe, because there are so many more stories like this one waiting for you. Drop a comment below and tell me, would you have handled it the same way I did, or would you have done something different? I'll see you in the next one.